Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Evening.
What I'm going to do here is spend about 5 minutes talking a little bit about the background to this thing, and then I'm basically going to spend as much time as you guys are interested in just walking you through the site, showing you the things it can do, talking about stuff. And I'm very happy if anybody's got any questions, or if I don't make any sense, just stop me, shout up, and we'll stop and have a look at it. And this can go on as, can be as short or as long as you'd like it to be. Can everybody see my slideshow at this stage?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yep. Got it.
That's the web address. If your technology allows you to, it might well be worth your while opening up that web address on a browser so that you can follow along doing the sorts of things that I'm doing. If you just want to see what I'm doing on the screen, that's fine too. That'll work. Either way, whatever suits you. So what is this thing called BGA Ladder? I'm assuming that most people have heard about it, but perhaps, and some of you I know have made good use of it, but probably quite a few of you don't know where it came from. So the whole idea is it's a national contest. It's a shared thing that operates throughout the country, including Scotland and Ireland and so forth. It creates a set of trophies, and we'll have a look in a little while at what those are and what they're for. So essentially it's the scorekeeping mechanism for awarding some trophies at the BGA conference. Does anybody know how they're going to do that this year, by the way? Because I doubt if we're having a physical meeting. No? Okay.
They're trying to organise a remote AGM.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll see. The other perhaps more recent thing that the ladder is for, and this is why I think it's particularly relevant in this environment, is the data that on there, the flights that people put up, is a really useful resource for showing where we've actually been for use in airspace analysis. So we have ways of creating, heat maps and activity maps so we can go to the authorities when it's appropriate and say, look, we've got really good evidence that gliders have been using this bit of airspace. And the other thing I think it's for is hopefully you guys will see it's a bit of fun. You can see what other people have got up to. You can see what they've done with today. Brief bit of history. It started out probably in the back end of the 90s, maybe the middle 90s. There might be somebody on who remembers better than me, certainly long before I was involved in doing any cross-country flying. And it was a manual system. There was a steward appointed in each interested club, and they collected data about flights that were being done. And of course, in those days, even loggers were, GPS loggers were still relatively rare. So there's even a facility, or was a facility, to allow people to use turning point photographs in the ladder rather than GPS log files. That's long gone. And it was intended really as an alternative to formal competitions. So it was a way for people to share what they were doing and compete for trophies, but without having to go away and do a organized regional or national competition. In about 2002, John Bridge, who's a very experienced pilot, 8,000-hour plus pilot who flies out of Cambridge and also happens to be a software bod, created the online ladder site back in 2002. He tells me that he was stuck on a cruise ship going around New Zealand and did it because he was bored. So he did all the design, and then when he got back, he created the ladder website. And then I made the mistake of going drinking with John in the wrong bar a few years ago, and he talked me into taking, we'd done a bit of work together on some of the airspace stuff, so he talked me into taking it over. So I did a bit of technical work in the background and then took over just over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago now, as National Ladder Steward. So where is it now? We've got about 72,000 flights on the ladder going back through all those years, and we've still got a record of every flight that's ever been submitted to the ladder, unless they've, technical problems. And almost all of those we've got a log file for. So about 3,000 users, active users on it. How many of those are actually active in the sense of submitting flights? Don't know. I could easily enough find out, for example, I haven't looked actually to see how many flights have or how many pilots used it to put flights on last year. We get, over the past sort of 4 or 5 years, about 5,000 or 6,000 flights a year being submitted. And as of the beginning of this year, it's now compulsory to put log files on it. So, you know, if you want to put a flight on the ladder, you need a log file. Doesn't matter what it comes from, doesn't have to be an approved logger. So all those things like Flight Recorder 300s or XC SOAR or whatever are fine. You can use those things. So there's different ways to use the ladder. You can use it as a lurker. You can just use it to have a nose around what people are doing. And that's what I'm going to show you in just a second. And we'll go and have a look at that in a minute. If you want to put something on the ladder, you need to log in. I know some of the guys here, you guys here this evening have got logins, but you don't have to compete. You can just put your flights on so that they will be available for airspace purposes, if that's what you like to do. And that phrase there is when people say to me, you know, what flight should go on the ladder? Well, that's what I tell them. Anything that's legally conducted and leaves the circuit, I'm quite happy to see it on the ladder because it acts as airspace, evidence of airspace use. Even if you choose, and I'll show you how to say, I don't want to have this entered in as a competitive flight, I'm just giving it to you because then you can use the data. That's what we call ad hoc files. And then there's a third way you can use it as a steward, which in this context means you, Peter. Right, let's have a look at the ladder site then. Can everybody see that ladder site coming up in place of the in place of the PowerPoint?
AFM.
Yes.
Great. So this is what it looks like. If you go to that web address, you will get a menu bar across the top that will look at some of the things in here. You get I've logged in, so it's got my name there. We can log out, you get a picture, and you get the main things that you can do with the ladder down here. So the most commonly used thing, highlighted in blue, and we'll go there in a moment, is the daily scores. You can press this button, we'll go to that in a bit, to say, let's put a flight onto the ladder. Here's what I was talking about just now, add an airspace only flight. I just want to give you this flight so that you can get a record of it, but I'm not going to enter the competition. And then a couple of other bits and pieces in here. Perhaps this one's useful, this My Info. That takes you to all the data that the ladder's got that relates to you personally. We'll have a look at mine. So let's look at the daily scores first, because that's the place where most people go when they want to see what's been going on. And what you get is a grid of flights. And they're organized by date, with the most recent one at the top. And if there are more than one flight on a day, then they're organized by total points score down the right-hand side here. Yeah. And we can see the sorts of people who are posting flights. So we've got Chris Gill, of course, at Denbigh is posting flights. He's probably one of the few people posting flights at this time of year. We've got Roy Wilson up in Scotland. We've got Santiago Cervantes, who is an amazing wave pilot flying out of Port Moke, doing extraordinary things in the wave. There you go. So he flew 500K in the wave on the 19th of November, and so forth. And there are, you can see down the bottom here, there are 76 pages of that. If I go right to the very last page, you can see that takes us back to the beginning of the year, where, guess what? Roy Wilson, same chap, did the flight on the 1st of January to get the year off to a good start. Let's go back to the beginning. So what we're looking at here are dates, who it's by, which glider they were flying, what they did, and some stuff about their flight. How far did they go? How long did they take? Speeds that they did. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of the scoring system this evening, but there's a scoring system that allocates cross-country points and height points and comes up with a total score. And that's used in the end to determine who the ladder, who has won the trophies. If I click on the, oh, and by the way, these three are red because they've been done within the last 2 weeks. That's all it means. The most recent flights are colored in red. If I click on the flight, I get a picture come up showing me what he did. So we can see that, so I get a bit more information about his flight. I can see a picture here of Scotland, which hopefully everybody can see. So he took off from a Boyne and he flew over to somewhere near Ben Nevis and he flew back. And this is his barograph. So we can put our mouse across the barograph and see where he was, the little glider going along, and how high he was at any point in the flight. And the red bit of the trace at the beginning is because this is a self-launching glider, it shows me that that's when he was running his engine. And down at the bottom here, we've got a couple more things that are quite useful. We've got a pilot narrative. So when we put a flight in, you're invited to give a description of, you know, what was it you did? What do you want to tell everybody about your flight? And that's what appears here. And there's also a couple of photographs that he's chosen to attach to his flight. If I click on one of those photographs, it'll bring up another screen, which can anybody see that photograph screen appearing?
No.
Negative.
Okay, stand by one. Right.
Yeah.
Now you can see it. So these are the two photographs. It's because I'm sharing a window rather than a screen. So these are the photographs that Roy chose to put up. A bit of a description and a picture of him flying in the wave. And we'll have a look a bit more of those later. So you can put some stuff up that helps helps people see what you've done. Let's go back to that one. Right. And then there's a lot of other detail here on the screen about what this guy, you know, the flight and all the details of how high he went and all that kind of thing. But in summary, that's what you get as information about what somebody did. And if you're a bit of a gliding nerd, then that can be quite interesting to go and see what people did on a particular day.
Chris, can I just ask?
Yeah.
Is that just from the IGC file?
Yeah.
So that all happens automatically when you load up your IGC file?
Well, let me caveat that. The task may or may not come from the IGC file. Depends. If it's in the IGC file, it will use it, but you don't have to. You can actually enter the task manually and then just say, here's the log file of what I actually did.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does, thank you.
Right, and there's a couple of other things we can do on here. We can, you know, if we really want to, we can have different kinds of maps. We can turn on the airspace so that we can see what happened, where we went in relation to airspace. Is that coming up for people?
Yeah.
And interesting, this is something that Santiago Cervantes asked me to do. He said, can we see a picture of what the weather did on that day? And if this is working, which it appears it's not working at the moment. No, okay. You should be able to overlay a sat pic, but it's not working this evening. Don't know why. Let me just try again. No, the sat pic's obviously been turned off. It's night, that's why it's all dark. But we should be able to get a sat pic on there. I'll have to look into why that wasn't working. So that's the detail on the flight. And there's a few things that people can do up the top here. You can edit some details and you can say, oh, I want to delete this flight and stuff like that. And if you see a flight that you think, that's a bit dodgy, he's not, you know, he's busted airspace or whatever, there's a little red flag you can put up here that will flag up the flight to the steward of the club in question and also to me. It does that anonymously, by the way. So, but if that gets abused, I shall turn it off. So other things, yeah.
Chris, just a question on the glider.
Yeah.
At 31.
Yeah.
What wingspan's that?
21 meter.
Right. Okay.
So
it's smaller than the 28, or sorry, EB28.
It's smaller than an EB28. But you've nicely led me. You've secured me very nicely there, Alison. There's a button up here called Show Filters, where I can turn on a filter here, and you see a little extra bit of the screen appears.
Yeah.
And I can go to here, all glider types, and I can start typing in here. And I can look for a particular type of glider. So let's have a look at an Ash 31 MI in 21 meter mode.
Right, I see.
and it will go away and it will filter all the flights that it finds to just flights done in one of those gliders. And there's not very many of them in this country. So we've got Roy Wilson, we've got Steve Nuge, who flies down from the southwest, and we've got John Thompson, who I don't know, obviously flies LBZ, so he flies out of Dunstable.
Right.
So, yeah, and if you wanted to see what the EB28 did,
yeah,
you know who flies an EB28 in this country?
No, you just see them in Australia.
Ash 25 EB28 is what it happens to be.
Yeah.
And there it is. And there's Ed flying all over the country, phenomenal distances. While we've got that one up, notice this comments column. And I'm just going to pop that flight up. I've no idea what that is. He did, how far did he go? 760K. That wasn't a bad flight back in August. So that flight comes up. You can see he's got his photos across the bottom. That was a pretty damn good flight, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of extra things to see on this. I don't know if anybody can see, there's a little blue photo tick there.
Yeah.
If the photos have got georeferencing in them, so you've taken them on your phone or whatever, then it will use that to put up a marker saying that's where the photo was. So when you look at the photo, you know where it was taken. Yeah?
Looks like he went to the Isle of Wight.
He did go down to the Isle of Wight, yes. He went down to St. Catherine's Point, and then he went up to somewhere in the middle of Wales, you know, not very far south from where I am now. Quite a flight. But then Ed's quite a pilot. So we can see here his comment about what he said he'd do, and you can look at that online. And you can see here also, one of the other nice things is that people can add their own comments. You have to be logged in to do it, but you can see other people coming back, talking about what, you know, providing useful information or comments back or whatever. So there can be a bit of a discussion about a particular flight. And that can be quite interesting too, when you see different people doing different things and why. So there's a discussion going on here, if in case you can't read it, about how they managed to get airspace clearances and other people who are trying to get airspace clearances down near the south coast, whether they succeeded or not. So that discussion can be useful. If we're interested, for example, let's get rid of that. If we want to say, well, what's happening at a particular club, we can filter to flights that are done from a particular club. And hey presto, John featuring rather a lot. Are you with us this evening, John? He was. And we can see the flights that have been done from Seifert.
He is just muted.
Yeah, from Staffordshire Gliding Club. Well, and we've got one from Peter here as well. So perhaps not quite as far as Ed's flight that we saw just now, but nevertheless, it's all good stuff.
He's in a label. He's not.
Exactly, yeah. You could probably fit two of those side by side with an EB28. And there's lots of other things that you can play with on here. So you can look at a particular pilot, you can look at a particular launch point, you can say, show me all the flights that went to a specific turn point. So, you know, if I wanted to be interested, I could say, show me every flight that went to, you know, or declared that they were going to go to Snowdon. And there aren't that many of them this year, and all by Chris, or mostly by Chris. Okay. If we really wanted to zoom in, we could zoom into a particular day, but I'll come back to that at the moment. I'm just going to get rid of that filter. So, and the other thing that we've recently added in here is regions. So we can actually say, let's just have a look at a particular region. So only look at flights in Scotland and the borders. And that way people can run little regional competitions, a bit like the Interclub League, if that's what they want to do. It's just a way of filtering the data, so you can use it in different ways. Get rid of that.
Chris, I'd be interested to see Tiago's profile of his 7,000-foot aerotow at Sutton Bank.
Did he actually put it up here? Why is he not with us? No, he hasn't. The only flight that he's put up this year is his 50K.
I saw that, and I was wondering whether he put his 7,000-foot aerotow up, but he hasn't.
He obviously hasn't, no. And we can't force people to do it. So reset filter. So let's, And by the way, if you can, there's all sorts of clever things you can do. And if you're really interested in only looking at a particular club, if you're only interested in ciphered flights, for example, you can set up the filter and then you can save it. And then it'll use that filter every time you come back here. Something that can be quite useful on here is looking at what's going on a particular day. Let me just reload that. Tidy the screen up. So if I was to come down here and look at, for example, I'll just pick a recent day, the 16th of November. So we've got 3 flights here on the 16th of November, all up in Scotland. If I click on the date, I get a little map up showing the flights that were found on that day. And I can, again, elsewhere, I can look at a particular flight, say, oh, that's interesting, get it highlighted, click on that, and just like before, we go up and we get the details of that particular flight with who it was and where they went and so forth. So if you're looking at a particularly busy day, so let's perhaps go and have a look at one in...
I think England was still in lockdown then, Chris. I
think it was. So I was just thinking, if we go back to a day in August, let's see. It was a bit busier, perhaps. 25th of September looks as though it was there were a few flights. Oh, that was all us going out to Nevin. We'll come to that. So it's just taking a second or two to pull those up. No, I'm not going to wait for that. Let's hope the technology hasn't died on me in the background. So we can look at flights on a particular day. We can look at flights by glider. And really, that's about, there's lots more to nose into. If you're really nerdy, you can sort by these columns. But that's about showing what's going on and what people did on a particular day. If I was to look at the ladders then, which is the other, this is all stuff that we could be doing without being logged in. None of this that I've looked at now needs you to have an account. So we can see who's winning the ladders on the ladder. So the national ladder is currently being won by a chap called Andy Aveling, who flies, I remember flying with him out of Looney Park before I went solo. So that's quite a while ago. He flies a brand new Arcus out of Lasham and flies it enormous distances all the time. We have and the open ladder basically says it's for anybody, any glider. The scores are all handicapped, but there's no sort of limit in that. And Andy's doing quite well at that. He's got nearly 31,000 points. And he will get a trophy for that. We'll have a look at that in a second. We have a ladder which is just for flights done at the weekend. The idea of that is that, we weren't penalising the people who've got to go out and work for a living. And guess what? Ed's winning that. We have a junior ladder. Finn Slay, member of the British junior team, is winning that, surprisingly. We have a vintage ladder, which is really for, well, originally it was called the wooden ladder, but now it's a handicap level, and I can't remember what the handicap cutoff is, but Adrian Emk always wins it. He flies a K6 phenomenal distances out of Lasham. Guess what? Chris Gill's winning the height ladders. What a surprise. Andy has got the total distance, so he's got the highest total distance on the ladder. And then recently we've introduced a couple of new trophies, non-MOP. So basically these are trophies for flights done in gliders that don't have an engine. I'm not a fan of the phrase pure glider because I think a glider with an engine is just a glider. But I do get the point that for ladder flying, having or not having an engine makes quite a difference. Because you're quite allowed to go off, do a flight, and you can bring a flight back as undeclared. We'll see that when we put a flight in, but and you don't get as many points as pre-declaring it, but you can still happily do that. And then down here, we can look at the detail of exactly individual ladders. Let's have a look at the awards though. So at the end of this, and the cutoff date is the end of the month, who's currently winning the trophies? So these down the left-hand side are the trophies that are awarded, and there's a handshake, or probably not this year, but and A big silver pot goes with these. So Paul Fritsch at Lasham, who those of you who read S&G will have seen quite a good article by Paul describing his joy in flying his LS8 long distances recently. And he's done the longest handicap distance with up to 4 TP. So he did 827 kilometers on the 20th of July, which is a pretty damn good flight by anybody's reckoning. The longest triangle, and the scoring system is very much biased in favor of big triangles. You don't get as many points for doing an out and return as you do for doing a triangle. Covering more area gets you more points. So Ed flew quite a big triangle quite quickly back in August. Speed-wise tends to be won by the Scottish guys, because of course they hurtle up and down wave bars. So Cervantes did 115k around 500k in October. Normally that would be much higher, but of course this year they haven't been so good. Now, when you register for the ladder, you're asked to declare your gender. You can say indeterminate if you wish, but the reason we do it is because there is actually a trophy that's reserved for women pilots, the California and England Cup, currently being won by Liz. Still a pretty damn good flight, that.
Liz Sparrow, she's got the right surname.
Yeah, she's on the British team. She used to be the chair of the comps committee, and I like Liz a lot. She doesn't take any prisoners, you know, which appeals to me. Again, fastest handicap. So there's a series of trophies like this, and we can see who's winning these various things. And if we wanted to see what are the flights that Paul Fritsch did in order to get himself eligible to wing the ladder that, there we go, we can see here's his flights. And he did a flight. So the way it works out that score is it picks out the 6 best flights by the pilot and adds up the points available to them. So those are his 6 best flights, and that gave him more points than anybody else. And if we want to look at, you know, what was his best flight that he did, this one that scored 5,578 points, guess what? It's a fairly dramatic, I think that's probably the same one as we were talking about just now. Yeah, 750k in an LS8. And he went, well, you can see where he went. Quite nice. So those are the ladders. And as I say, there will be prizes awarded for those. Before we look at adding a flight, a couple of other things, there's a My Info page, which is all the stuff that is your own information. So this is the one for me. So you can see down here, these are the flights that I've put onto the ladder this year, not very many of them. And this is where this is the scores I've achieved in the various ladders. I don't think I'm going to be troubling the trophy awarders anytime. When I've added photographs, I can see the list of the photographs I've got here, and you can do things like delete them and stuff if you want to. Because I'm a member at Denby by default on here, I can see the Denby club tasks, and we'll talk about club tasks in a minute. If when I'm creating flights, I want to use waypoints that are not in the BGA list, I can create my own waypoints and use those, and they're shown here. So you're not constrained to using only the BGA waypoints. And then I mentioned right at the beginning, the ad hoc flights that you can put up, flights that you put up that are there just for the purposes of airspace. And there's a few I've put up on here. They actually go back to previous years. So there was a flight I put up here, and we did a bit of wave hunting. I can't remember when that was. And then it rained, and we didn't do anything that I thought was worth putting into the main ladder. So I just put it up as an ad hoc flight. And that was on the 16th of November. So that's that's my info that anybody can get. If you're interested, you can read the rules. I'm not going to read them out to you. And there is a forum. So there's a bit of a forum that you can exchange chat in. So we tend to use this for problems or enhancements. So here's, for example, we made some, each year we do a revision of the rules. So I put up a post here saying, this is what we're going to change. You're not too worried about the detail of it. And people can come back and say, so Cervantes came back and said, asked for a bit of clarification about certain things. So we can have a bit of a discussion about stuff that goes on. And often in here, we get requests for things like, can you change it to do this? And can we do that? And if they make sense, then yes, we do. We can change stuff. So that's about the things that I would say that we use, about as much as I want to say about just having a look at what's on there. How do we add a flight? To add a flight, you have to have logged in. To create, let me just log out. Let me log out and log back in so you can see. So if you haven't got an account on the ladder, click on the register button. It'll ask you for a bit of information about who you are. The email address needs to be a good one. You need to say which club you're associated with. When you click the register button, you'll get sent an email, which you then have to click on in order to prove that you've got that email address. It's a security thing, and you choose a password and all that kind of stuff. And then you just...
Chris, sorry, Chris, I used to have one before this system became this system. Did that automatically carry through, or would we have to re-register?
No, it should carry on. Should have carried through. If you have trouble logging in, so if I go to log in now, so because my web browser, it's filled in my username and password, but if you've forgotten your password, Graham, you can click on here, and as long as you've got the right email address, then you can get a password reset link and it'll send it to you.
I suspect I can't.
If you can't even remember the email address that you've used, let me know and I'll sort it out.
Yeah, mine's on an old email address that I left behind with my work, so I might have to do that.
That one, aren't you?
Yeah. I'll send you my new one.
If you send me an email with your new address, I'll dive in the back door and fix that one for you.
Lovely. Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Okay. So, and there's the usual remember me thing that you get on websites. So if I log in, suddenly now it knows it's me. And if I click on my name up here, there's a bunch, I can edit some of this stuff. So if I change clubs, I can say I'm going to a different club. I can change my password, the usual sorts of things. I can decide that I'm now an indeterminately gendered person, if I so desire. And there's a few settings that we can play with that determine how the site works. So you can set up in here your default glider, your registration, so that when you come to add a flight, all of that stuff gets filled in automatically and you don't have to do it again. Yeah? Whether you've got a turbo, there's a few things to do with the appearance of the grid, whether it's whether when you put an IGC file up, will it analyze it for engine stuff? Most of the time, there are fairly sensible defaults on these, so you don't have to play with this if you don't want to, but it's there if you're interested. If you want to play with the way sectors are worked out, you can fill in your sectors. So, how big a start radius are you going to have? And while I'm here, I'm going to change that to 5 because I need to. Because the rules are changing to be at 5 sectors next year. Do I want to use thistles, these half-K barrels, or not, and so forth. Save that, that's a change saved. And now, with all of that there, I can say add a flight. And if I say add a flight, a rather intimidating looking form comes up, but it's actually not that hard. You can see that it's filled in the glider that I have, because I declared that in my preferences, and it knows the handicap. It knows the handicap of all the BGA gliders, so you don't have to fill that in. So the first thing it wants to know is, well, when did this flight happen? And you can fill it in off a calendar, or you can just say, actually, it was today. You can, there is a penalty if you post flights more than 14 days after they happen, so you don't get as many points. I think it's a 10% penalty from memory. And then down here, here's where I can manually fill in the task that I chose to do. So I can say, you know, was I using what kind of sectors did I use? So where did I go from? So I don't know. Perhaps I could say I started from Seifert, and I get a list of things, and I can say, oh look, Seifert Hangar, and I went to Husbos, and then it's filled in the finish. And so let's say I did an out and return to Husbos. So it's filled in the task details. It's worked out the task distance down here. And I can say, and I have to say, I actually reached that turn point, and then it goes green. So because you can actually abandon a turn point if you wish, but again, that's a bit detailed. So I got to that turn point. So I'm saying I actually did that task. I finished it. And you can see that it's therefore the scoring distance is the same as the task distance, because I'm going to be scored for the completed task. Yeah, but it doesn't know how fast I went because I haven't told it yet. So let's say I was going like a bloody rocket that day. So I only took, I don't know, 2 hours and 30 minutes to do that task, say. Yeah, and it was declared. I did say I was going to do that task before I set off, and that's what I did. So it's now worked out how fast I went. And under the normal FAI rules and also the ladder rules, if you use more than 1,000 meters height difference between your start and finish, then you have to pay a distance penalty, because they're saying, you know, you glid off 3,000 foot worth of height. But I'm going to say I didn't do that, so that's fine. If I was doing a height claim, I'd fill in my low and high points here. And at the end of this, I can hit calculate, and it should, there you go, work out the details of my task. It says it was an out and return, which gives me what's called a shape factor of 1, which is this business about scoring the system, skewing the scoring in favor of big triangles. I get that many distance points, that many speed points, for a total of 11, just under 1,200 points. Nothing has happened in the ladder yet. So I can say, okay, yeah, I got that right. I filled in those numbers correctly. Submit. And now it asks me for a bit more information about the flight. So confirming the registration, again, it's picked it up from my preferences, knows that I'm flying in a 2-seater, so it asks me who I was flying with. So I don't know, who did I go to Husbos with a while ago? There you go, Tiago. And it doesn't matter what you put in there, it's just a piece of text. Was there an engine in my glider? Yes. And then here is a few, you know, local ladders it might be eligible for. I don't know I don't think there are any Seifert local ladders set up. Here I can type in the story. So that's the comment that we were looking at earlier. What happened? What was the flight all about? You know, tell us something interesting about it. And if I have some pictures, I can upload them here. I can click them to upload. Notice I've got a red box here because it's not going to let me submit this flight until I upload a logger file. I'm not going to do that right now because this is the live system. And once I've done all of that, I'd hit submit, and that's it. It goes into the system, the flight is published. Job done. Yeah. But I'm going to show you an easy way to do that. I'm going to cheat here because I'm going to go to a slightly different website because I don't particularly want to add a flight. Actually, no, I was thinking that I'm wrong about that. Now, there's an easier way to add a flight. I just start again. Let's say you've got your log file. You've downloaded it from your fancy LX Gizmo or offloaded it from your XC SAW running Kobo or whatever it might have to be. As long as it's a valid IGC file, it'll do. And I hit this button called Load IGC. And I'm going to be asked, because I don't have a way of checking automatically, whether or not you're asked to declare that you didn't bust airspace. And if somebody looks at your log file and it turns out you did bust airspace, having declared no, then you can be pretty sure you'll hear about it. So, yep, I'm not sure this is good. And it's just asking me for where the log file is. And I don't know if, oh, here we go. Let's see if I've got any log files on here. I might, oh yes, I know where I can get one. Excuse me. So if I just pick up, I'm just picking up a random log file. Ah, no, I picked a bad one. I should have practiced this, excuse me. There you go. So it's picked up the log file. It's looked at the task that was in there and it's filled it in for me. So that task was Conway to Nevin. And if I change, and because it's in, and I know why it said unfinished. There we go. Because I know I flew barrels on that and I haven't got it set to barrels. So it's filled in the fact that I started at Conway, I went to Nevin, and I went back to Conway. It's worked out by looking at the log file that I actually did do that. So it's ticked in the stuff for me. It's pulled the flight times out and worked out the speeds. There you go. You can see it's filled in the time for me to the very second. It's worked out that I didn't use more than 1,000 meters of height. It's basically filled, and it's pulled in the flight date and all the rest of it. It's filled in pretty much everything, worked out the points. All I've got to do is hit submit. Notice I've got this, you know, because I've chosen a flight back in July, I've got a warning saying I'm going to get a penalty and all the other stuff to fill in. And this time the box is green because it's already got the logger file.
Chris, if you populate all the details from the turn point, then load your file in, does it overwrite it or stay with what you put?
No, it stays with what you put.
Right, okay.
So for example, I'm not going to submit this flight, obviously, because I don't want to submit a lie to the ladder. But I could come back here and say, actually, what I actually did is I went to say Conway South, and I could change that to Conway South, or I can't remember what is it? Conway South there. And I could say I actually started there, and it will believe you. It doesn't go back and check the log file and say, no, you didn't do that. Right. It's a trust-based system. But anybody looking at the trace online might well, you know, and can see that you haven't done what you claim to do, might use that little red flag thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody who's in line for a trophy, as we were looking at earlier, will get all their flights properly scrutinized. So somebody will look at the log files and make sure that they actually did what they claim to do. So, but for the kind of flying that, I don't think, except possibly for Mr. McLaughlin, I don't think any of us are likely to be in the running for a trophy. And therefore, you know, trust and keeping, you know, one of the roles of club stewards is to keep an eye on this sort of thing. So, you know, if somebody was, and there have been occasions in some clubs that I'm aware of where people have been a bit cavalier about the rules, and club stewards go and have a word with them. And if they don't succeed, I have a word with them. And if that doesn't work, I delete their flights. I haven't had to do that more than once that I can think of. So this load IGC thing, if you've got an IGC file, is far and away the easiest way to do it, particularly if you've declared the task that you want to fly in your gizmo before you went. But I'd re-emphasize, I said at the beginning, doesn't have to be a formally approved logger. It'll quite happily, you know, if you've got a little flight radar position recorder, one of those fly with CE gizmos, which doesn't understand the task, all it does is record where you went and your height in GPS terms, you can quite happily use those log files on here, and you just put your task in the manual way that I showed you just now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's about it. I just want to go, one more thing I'm going to show you before we move on, stewards. So if you're a steward, Peter, are you still with us?
Confirmed, steward.
Yeah, so Peter is our club steward. So if I wanted to log in as a club steward, Peter, did you get the email I sent you with your password?
Yeah, I'm now on.
Right, okay. I'm going to log in here as well because people can't see your screen. See if I can remember what I sent you. By the way, notice if you do log into this, passwords are case sensitive and there is a forgotten password button there. Right. So I did remember it. So these are the details that we've got about Staffordshire Gliding Club. It's in the North West and North Wales region. So if we were looking at regions, as we did earlier, that's where we'd show up. Peter Gill, with that email address, is the steward, and we've even got his address. Is that the right address, Peter? Have you moved?
It is, yes.
Well done. And a couple of things stewards can do, but only stewards can do. One is they can set up some club tasks. Now, the advantage of a club task on here is you don't have to pre-declare it. So everything else has to be pre-declared, ideally electronically, but we're quite happy to, you know, if people make a paper declaration, we believe them unless there's reason not to believe them. But if you fly a club task, then you can just set off and do it. You don't have to declare it. And you can have, you know, relatively small club tasks, 100K triangles. And we can also have ladders. So there's one there's one local ladder for the Staffordshire Gliding Club, the Staffordshire Open ladder, and it's linked to the national ladder, which basically means the points that you get in the Staffordshire Open ladder are the same as the points you get in the cross-country ladder. If you wanted to set up a ladder in here, say, for example, for, I don't know, the Lakes task or something like that, where you weren't wanting to score it in the same way as the normal ladder, you know, Peter, we were talking about some suggestions about that earlier today, weren't we?
Yeah.
Then this is where you'd set it up. You'd just put it in here, and you would put not linked, and that means basically the scores have to be put in by the club steward, so it puts a bit of work in for them. Okay. And so that's the local ladders and club tasks, and the other thing that you can do on here is, as a steward, you can see all of the scores for all of the club members that have been put in there, and you have the ability to override them. Particularly if somebody comes to you and says, you know, I got my 10% penalty because I was too late putting my flight on because I was, you know, stuck in a COVID lockdown in Uzbekistan or something, some excuse that you consider to be reasonable, you can override that here and do something about it. And you can also, you know, we might have active or non-active pilots on here. So, you know, active pilots are people who are supposedly using the ladder. It looks like Pete, is there a Pete, is this a double up? Has Pete Lowe managed to put himself in twice, I wonder?
He has.
Yeah, okay. Well, those sorts of things happen, and we, you know, that's the sort of stuff I can sort out if somebody draws it to my attention. Here you can see the scores that people have got in the Staffordshire Open ladder, which, guess what, they're the same as the other ones. Mike Fox has got that many. You've got that many, Peter, because that was a flight that went in. And John has got that many. So he's winning the Staffordshire Open ladder. Okay, stewards. So we've done that. Yeah. So any questions about any of that at this stage?
No.
Okay, so you can press your club steward, ladder steward, to set up some club tasks for you. The last thing I'm going to show you is, if I just go back to here, screen sharing, new share. So there's a couple of things that we're working on. So there's a whole new viewer coming on, and I'm going to show you that in a second because we've just launched that this week. That allows you to look at multiple flights at once, and there's going to be some proper detailed task analysis for the real nerdies, a bit like CU does. So it tells you how many thermals you took and how fast you flew. I've been talking to the guys at Navitaire about integrating with CU so you can move flights to and fro for, seems like, years. It might happen or it might not. And I showed you the forum earlier. You can't post in the forum until you've created an account, but once you've created an account, you can do. I'm equally happy for you to email me. If you have an idea, tell me about it. You know, and if it's a good idea, because it's basically me and one other guy who's now started helping me doing this, then, you know, it's up to me whether things happen in here or not. It's you know, the power, I've gone power mad. Right, so let's have a quick look at some of those one of those new things before I shut up. Here we go. Go back to that screen. So I quickly showed you earlier preferences, and I skipped over the fact that down here there's a couple of things called using Glana, which is this new glider analyzer, apparently. So I'm going to, and it's there, and but it's turned off by default. It's only turned on if you come to this screen personally and ask for it to be turned on. And now if I go back to the daily scores and have a look at Roy Wilson's flight, I get a rather different form of map. And this is the new one that my good friend Hugo is working on. So we've still got the photos down the bottom and the comment. This is looking at the same flight, but we've put the barogram across the bottom here. We're getting a bit more information about what he's doing. So at that point, his glider is Alpha 31. He's running his engine. He's at 3,195.5 feet. And it's that time in the morning. And you can see where he is from the little dot on the map above. That's going to change to be a glider icon like the old one in due course. And then, you know, we can scroll through his flight and we can see whether he's climbing or sinking, what his rate of climb was across the whole flight. And it's drawn the sectors of the task that he put in. So, bing, he went into the sector and then he scurried home. And I think that's quite a nice viewer. And if you really want to, you can just play it back and it will play it back. I'm not doing anything. And there's some settings that you can play with in here to say whether you want. You can. The guy who wrote this is a Portuguese guy living in London, Hugo Ribeira. Thoroughly nice guy and very helpful. But of course, he wrote it in metric, and I had to say, I'm afraid you'll have to put imperial in there for the British market. And you can play with the playback speed and all this kind of thing. So that's quite nice. And the other thing that Glana lets us do is look at several flights at once. And there's a new button appeared up here since I turned that on. So I can turn that on. And let's go to look at those ones on the 19th of November again. 1, 2, 3. So I select those 3 flights. And now you've got a button up here saying view flights. So now I've got a new tab come up. And provided the technology doesn't let me down, there we go. Now I've got all 3 of those flights, which all happened on the same day in the same area, up on the screen at once, which I think is quite sexy. And again, I can scroll through and see what these 3 guys who are all flying from Portmogue and what they did. So the blue one is Santiago in Cervantes in SC. There's KS and FCB. I can't remember who the pilots were. And you can see they're all using different bits of the sky at the same time. And one of them only went as far as Forfar, which is quite far enough, and so forth. So that's, again, quite a nice way if you want to look at, particularly if you've got a group of people who've all flown the same task and you want to compare how you did and what different things you might have done at different points in the flight. And that's, you know, I think that's quite a nice thing. And Hugo's written all that. We're just integrating it at the moment. And the very last thing I'm going to show you is, I talked about photos going on flights. I'm just going to go and find one of my own flights. That one, yeah, one of our runs out to Nevin. So here we can see the flight. So, you know, we burnt a bit of fuel driving from Llueni out towards Colwyn Bay, and then we turned the engine off and we dropped down on the ridges and we ran along all those ridges all the way out to Nevin, back through, and then used a little bit of engine to drive home to Llueni. And Joe took some very nice pictures on this flight. And I'm going to just, and so we've got pictures, which you can't yet see, but I'm going to make that happen. So can everybody see? So Joe took some lovely pictures on this flight. And so we got quite close to the rocks. Lots of fun doing that flight. If you ever get the chance to go and do a Nevin run, go and do it. But you can also put movies on.
Right.
Try not to get stuck at Penman Mower.
That's west of Penman Mower. That's not far from the sticky up mast. I haven't got to the point of synchronizing that with the glider trace, I'm afraid. Sorry. It was quite a good day though. You can see nice views.
I didn't get that far.
You'll be doing the Nevin task in the 14 soon, Graham.
That's the plan at some point.
Okay, and really, that's all I've got to say, really. I mean, I've probably said quite enough. I'll just put that back to the... So, any questions?